So hi guys, my name is Keith. So for today's video, we're gonna talk about audio-visual materials. So before that, we need to know the objectives of using one. First objective is to increase the effectiveness of teaching. For example, here in a picture, you see a teacher using an example of audio-visual materials to increase his or her effectiveness of teaching. Next is to hold the attention span of learner for duration of instruction. Because students nowadays tends to have low attention span, but using this type of material, which is audio-visual material, you can help them increasing their attention span and as well as being more creative. And lastly, to save time, because using this type of materials really save time because it's easier to access. And yeah, so now let's define audio-visual materials. So first, it is an educational material where most of them are being used in educational setting or even in a workplace. Next is it uses your senses. It basically uses your senses like the sense of talking, touching, hearing, seeing, and smelling. It basically controls your senses. And lastly, it usually used in classroom instruction because this type of materials are designed to use in a classroom setting. And now we're gonna talk about types of audio-visual materials. So there are 6 of them. First, we have traditional aids. Second, projection aids. Third, motion aids. Fourth, we have the dimension of object aids. Fifth, we have the based on size media aids. And lastly, the based on organ use aids. But first, we're gonna talk about traditional aids. There are 3 of them. First, we have the audio aids. This is the material that can only be heard. For example, we have radio, megaphone, and compact disc. These equipments basically produces sound where your main concern here is your sense of hearing, which is it considered as audio aids. Next, we're gonna talk about the visual aids. Materials that appeals chiefly to vision. The main concern here is your sense of seeing. For example, we have blackboard, which is accompanied with chalk, of course, which displays information, as well as the bulletin board and poster. So in posters, you can see there the 4 W's, which is what, who, when, and where is the topic or the events gonna take place. Next and lastly, to the traditional aids, we have audio-visual aids, where it uses both senses of hearing and seeing. For example, we have lecture, which is basically talk about topics where you can see your professor talking in front and you listening to him or her, as well as in the demonstration where you can see and hear the demonstrator demonstrate about a particular product. And lastly, a good example is film, where you can see and hear it, and as well as acquire knowledge from it. Next type, we have projection aids. First, we have projection aids that's shown upon a screen. For example, we have film strips, motion pictures, and slide projection, where basically project images or pictures. Next, we have the non-projected aids, which is the use without any projection. Without any projection, keep that in mind. First, we have the world map or a map. We have photographs and books. These are all examples of non-projected aids. And now let's move to motion aids. In motion aid, we have the static aids that don't move nor have sound. For example, we have flashcards, which basically doesn't have sound at all and doesn't move unless you touch it, but it displays information in it. Next, we have the dynamic aid. It is an aid that changes during presentation. Example, we have television, where it displays pictures or videos that constantly changing over time. And now let's go to the dimension of object aids. First, we have the 2D aids that have 2 dimensions, such as width and height. For example of that, we have building blocks, where majority of us in our younger years, we played this type of toy or materials where it basically has shapes in it. They have triangle, square, rectangle, circle, cylinder, anything that has shape in it that you can actually form something into it, which you can acquire something information that you need to learn. Next, we have the 3D aids, which is close to reality aids. This type, they are converted experiences where reality is altered or simplified for teaching purposes. For example of that, we have the globe, which is the physical representation of our planet Earth. Now, let's move on based on size media aids. There are two types. First, we have the big media, which has mass communication, which basically means it has a larger audience in it. For example of that, the teachers or the host may use computers or television because this type of tools, it can accommodate wide spectrum of audiences and can link to them in no time. Next, we have the little media, basically, which obviously means small audience, where you can use cassette tapes or radios because this is available to anyone and can easily access with. And lastly, we're gonna talk about based on organ use aids. First of that, we have the unimodal, which is involving one mode. Example to that, we have dictaphone, which basically concerns to your sense of hearing because it only produces sound. Or we have exhibits, where you can see paintings or pictures in it. That main concern is your sight or sense of seeing. And lastly, we have the bimodal, which is involving two modes, which is involving two senses. Example of that, we have watching videos on YouTube or Facebook, which basically uses your sense of hearing and seeing. Or a good example to that, we have the stage play. And now, let's move on to advantages of using audio-visual materials. First, we have accurate, because by using these materials, it corrects in all details. Because you can use a bold form, or you can use it to be more concise, so that your audience are not getting bored when you are going to discuss it or present to them. Next, we have the motivate learners, or to motivate learners, where you are encouraging them to achieve their own reasonable goals because you use such a powerful tool to convey or persuade them that they need to achieve their own reasonable goals. Next, we have to overcome possible hurdles, because using this type of aids, it basically gets students more interested and convenient because this type of materials is really fun to deal with because it's concise, it's brief, and the students get easily understand your topic. Next, we have cost effective, which is this material is simple and easier to access with, where the usage is worth at least what is paid for. Next, we have the transportability, which is the ability to move anywhere and in no time. So this type of materials is one of them. And in contrary to that, we have the disadvantages. First, we have the language barrier, which is commonly available to any of these materials. For example, mostly of our computer software or these materials are English based, which has a big problem in dealing or using it in a foreign land, where students or your audience doesn't speak English or doesn't understand English. That's why it also disadvantages in using of these materials. Next, we have the misuse of materials because some doesn't have knowledgeable enough to deal with this type of materials where they tend to use higher colors. Colors are misused. The materials are misused. For example, instead of using computer, they use a TV monitor like that, something like that. And now let's move to lack of infrastructure, where it basically the lack of facilities, technologies, and manpower, of course, because some institution or schools doesn't have that kind of money to make it possible. Next, we have the technical problems. It's very common where, example, some of these materials are not working, or some of these are broken, where you can't tell whether, when, or how it's gonna occur. That's why we can encounter technical problems. That's also the main reason why this materials is considered as disadvantage. Next, we have the knowledgeable enough, which means, or I mean, is that the user or the one who facilitate this type of material must have the basic knowledge in dealing with it, because if he or she doesn't have the knowledge to operate this type of material, that it can result to a disaster. And now let's move to steps in making audio-visual materials. So first, we have, you guess it, planning. So in planning, you need to know clearly the objectives of the presentation so that you can anticipate the problem and the size of your audience. And lastly, you can think about the quality of materials to be used in your presentation. Like this guy over here, he's planning for his topic. Next, we have the preparation, where in preparation you need to select the proper and convenient place. Seating arrangement must be suitable, or you need to use a proper venue for your proper audience or for your topic. And also make sure all equipments are working condition. And lastly, keep rehearsing to make a smooth presentation during the actual presentation. Like for this picture where you can see she prepares her materials before the presentation. And to that, we move to presentation. In presentation or during presentation, you should stand beside the aid, not in front of it. And also do motivate the audience and stress key points they observe during the presentation. For example, in the picture, you see the girl is standing left beside her materials, but you see this guy over here, we're standing in front of the aid or materials. You can do that, but in minimal, which is you can do that only if it's needed. And lastly, we have the evaluation. In evaluation, you should answer and ask questions to evaluate the effectiveness of the audio-visual materials you use and the topic that you presented. So that's it, my topic. So thank you.